بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So inshallah, this is the first session in the series of فن الخطابة أو دورة الخطابة وفن الإلقاء. So we'll be talking about public speaking and specifically public speaking related to Yawm al-Jum'ah, to the public speaking Yawm al-Jum'ah. Today, inshallah, on Mondays it'll be for adults, and for the younger ages like high school, early university, high school, it'll be on Thursdays, inshallah, after Isha. So if you have that age group that would like to attend, then that's the day for them, inshallah. And the reason that I made it to two groups, because it's a bit easier for when we do the practical part to have kind of the ages a bit separated. Because what I'll focus on talking to the adults is a bit different than what I'm going to be focusing on talking to the youth. It's not the same. It's not the same approach. Both age groups have different struggles or issues when it comes to doing public speaking and giving khutbahs. So it wouldn't be fair to have everyone in the same group. So that's inshallah the intention. So what I'll do today is I'll give a little bit of an introduction, and I'll explain to you inshallah what the plan is going to look like, and we'll talk about a few topics regarding kind of the broader aspect of what this is, and I'll go into some detail of all that. First of all, the disclaimer, I'm not a great public speaker. I'm probably not even a very good public speaker, but that doesn't matter. What really matters is that we can talk about the theory, and then we can talk about the practice, and we can go back and forth with that. I try my best, and you'll be doing the same as well in your life too. Really, all of this is the ability to kind of understand and comprehend the theory behind what makes a good public speaker, how it's done, and then being given the opportunity to try and fail and then try again until you kind of get a feel for what it's supposed to be like, and then you get into your own zone and you're happy with how you're doing things and you go on. You may never be, an amazing public speaker. You may be, an amazing, I don't know. There's no way for any of us to know. We just try our best to kind of learn this properly and give it our best shot. So that's kind of like a beginning. All right. Now, issues about public speaking or giving Jum'ah. It's the most effective tool for social change. Historically, the most effective tool is public speaking. It always has been. When you ever talk about huge movements in history amongst large numbers of people, populations, always the fuel of these movements have been great, amazing public speakers who are able to, affect people, who are able to impact their lives, and able to actually convince them of something and move them towards a goal. That's always how it's been. It's never been anything else besides that. And if you just go back historically and study all the big movements, civil rights movements or religion movements or political movements or, there's always going to be public speakers behind that, making sure things happen. So when we underestimate the effects that public speaking has on societies and communities, we don't do ourselves a favor by doing that. And really, that's why I think this series that we're going to have is extremely important, because no one has a more solid public speaking venue than we do. We have an extremely solid public speaking venue. It's beyond me, and I'll rant a lot about that, inshallah, so don't worry. You're looking forward to a lot of me just ranting about random stuff. And the reason is that it just doesn't make sense. How is it that we have this very solid venue and still we're not able to actually make the change that we hope to or want? The only common thing between leaders, effective leaders, is public speaking. It is I didn't say good leaders, by the way. Be very careful. I'm very careful with the word. I said effective leaders. Effective leaders are good public speakers. Whether they're good or bad doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, there's nothing in common between the Prophet ﷺ and Hitler. Nothing. There's nothing in common, but both of them were extremely effective leaders. Completely different goals, completely different directions in life, and the effect of what they did is completely different. But when it comes to leadership, they're both effective leaders. And I know the comparison is horrible, but it's just to explain that this is the only commonality that you will find amongst effective leaders, that they're capable of speaking to large groups of people. Even that orange trash can that's no longer, alhamdulillah, the president of, he knew how to speak to people. Maybe he wasn't articulate for the more educated part of the world, but when he stood behind a podium and he spoke to the public listened. And it doesn't matter that he had no agenda, he had no ethics, no morals, no goals, no plans. It still works. So it's extremely effective. That's why it's so important. And having, how many Jumu'ahs exist in the world today? I mean, if you count the numbers, it's mind-blowing that we're not doing better than we're doing right now. Let's talk about a little bit about the khataba of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. By the way, Yawm al-Jumu'ah, prior to maybe 3 centuries before the Prophet ﷺ's birth, his great-grandfather, Qusay bin Kilab, changed the name of the day. The day was called Yawm al-Aruba. And it was called that, and the word Aruba comes from gathering. People used to gather in large markets, and poets would give their poetry. And those who had written really, really effective or strong sermons would give their sermons, and people would gather to listen. And that was what the day was known for. And it was only changed to Yawm al-Jumu'ah by one of the Prophet ﷺ's early ancestors. And it was called al-Jumu'ah because Jumu'ah means gathering. So he just changed the name for it to suit what was actually happening on that day. So when Islam came along, it wasn't very difficult to get people to buy into the idea of gathering on Jumu'ah, because Arabs had been gathering on Jumu'ah many, many centuries before that, just in a different place for a different reason, right? But now things were going to be a little bit different. The Prophet ﷺ's reputation in Arabia, for those who weren't Muslims, what was it? I mean, for you and I, he is Rasulullah ﷺ, and that in itself is huge. And there are so many meanings to that for you and I, and the dimensions are almost endless. But I want you to think about an Arab who's living during the Prophet ﷺ's time, who doesn't believe in him, and never actually did, meaning he died not believing in the Prophet. If you were to ask him about the Prophet ﷺ, and he's finished saying all the bad stuff he wants to say, what was his actual reputation? What was he known for? He was known for fasaha. He was known for khataba. He was known for being an extremely articulate, powerful public speaker. That was his reputation, ﷺ, that this man can stand anywhere, anywhere. Doesn't need a podium, doesn't need an audience, doesn't need introduction, doesn't need preparation. He can stand anywhere and start speaking, and people will listen. People will gather around to hear what he has to say. During a time where the only gift people had, the only thing Arabs were good at, articulation, was their tongue. That high Arabic, that only the extremely intelligent, well-educated were able to speak. There's a lot of different tongues in Arabia. People spoke different types of Arabic. But that high Arabic, that fusha, that was a big deal. Poets spoke that. Leaders spoke that. The rest listened to it, enjoyed it, repeated it, memorized it, sang it, but they didn't speak it. They didn't have the ability to stand up and speak it. So the Prophet ﷺ was known for being an extremely fasih human being, very articulate, very capable, probably more than anyone else during his time. And when non-Muslims study his legacy, ﷺ, that's what they look at. That's how they define him. In many ways, they define him as someone who was an extremely powerful public speaker. Now, as a human being, how was he known to be? Anyone who knew the Prophet ﷺ, spent time with him, knew him to be someone extremely soft-spoken. He was very calm, ﷺ. Very calm, soft-spoken, very easygoing, very tender, very merciful. Unlike, me. He was a different type of, very calm. He wouldn't speak unless he was spoken to. If he spoke, didn't speak a lot. Didn't have a loud voice, wasn't, yelling everywhere. No, very quiet. But then he would get on the minbar. And when he got on the minbar, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, everything changed. It's like he had a different persona up there. It was a character switch. He got on the minbar, and then Jabir will tell us, and you'll find this in other hadith that are authentic to the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. قال إذا صعد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم المنبر قال احمر وجهه وعلى صوته واشتد غضبه. His voice would become loud. He would on a higher pitch, and you could see his face would turn red, and he would be much more aggressive and much more passionate. Let's say maybe not aggressive, but more passionate in the way he's speaking. قال كأنه منذر حرب يقول صبحكم ومساكم. When he's speaking on the minbar, if you didn't understand what he was saying, you would think that man is warning the people in front of them from a war, an army that's just behind the hill, coming to destroy everyone, and they need to immediately take action, immediately change things to save themselves. And then he would come down, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and go back to being the laid-back, extremely calm, easygoing person he was, alayhi salatu wasalam. So when he did public speaking, that there was, the word for it in English, they say showmanship. I'm not against the word, I don't think it's bad. But I think it needs to be used in context properly so it's not misunderstood. It's just you need to make sure that when you're speaking to people, you're doing it properly. Alayhi salatu wasalam understood that, and that's why he didn't speak. He didn't use the same tone that he used with people in his dars or when he was speaking to those who knew him. He didn't use the same tone on the minbar. No, on the minbar it was different. And people appreciated that. And we'll talk about, inshallah, a lot of these details once we come to to that part of this series. You need to remember that regarding Jum'ah, this minbar is his, alayhi salatu wasalam. This is the minbar of Rasulullah, alayhi salam, wherever it may be. You can put this minbar anywhere you want. It's his minbar, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. You're standing there because he's not here, period. So every time you stand up for a khutbah Jum'ah, you need to remind yourself of that. I do this as a ritual, that I'm standing right now, I'm filling in for Rasulullah, alayhi salatu wasalam. So I can start thinking, I try to put my mind mentally into what would he think right now of the situation? What would he want to say? What would his approach be? Respecting the holiness, really, the sanctity of what this minbar is, and who it was built for, and in whose name we're speaking. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I feel that's an aspect that has been forgotten over the years. It's kind of been left. No, when you stand, it's his alayhi salatu wasalam. Just make sure you never forget that. All right. Regarding khutbah al-Jum'ah, like I said, this series will be divided, or it'll focus on both aspects. It'll focus on public speaking in general. We'll talk about every form. Giving a dars, speaking in a azah, speaking in a wedding, speaking to different types of audiences, whether educated, scientific, non-scientific. We'll talk about all that. But we're going to talk about Jum'ah specifically as well. Why? Because I believe it's the most difficult form of public speaking that exists. That's my opinion. Others may disagree with me. But after looking at all the different types, I think Jum'ah is the most difficult. There are so many restrictions that surround it. There's so many restrictions that surround Jum'ah that make it very difficult to do well and to do properly. Which is why I think, when I want to give excuses to why is it that Jum'ah khutbah around the world don't really work, that what is your, if I ask you a question, it's a random question, what is your chance of walking into a masjid around the world and listening to a khutbah Jum'ah that you'll remember? Almost everyone here will give me a very small number. It'll be maybe 5%, 10%, maybe if you're optimistic, like maybe one time out of four. And why is that? Why is that? Because it's a difficult art. It's not easy. There's a lot of restrictions. You can't use a lot of the props you can use in normal. Even using something like this is not as easy. Not everyone accepts using PowerPoint or slides. You can't walk around as you would do. You're not supposed to, in Jum'ah, be doing too many gestures with your body language. There's certain things that make it specific. Arabic is a strong component. So if the audience is not Arabic speaking, that takes away, because you have to read a few verses in Arabic. You have to make sure that there's some part of that. Right? There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end, there's time limit. There's all these different restrictions that make it difficult. And of course, then the content itself and what the content is supposed to look like. And then the fact that you're not speaking, like right now I have an audience that, alhamdulillah, has been filtered to a certain extent. Right? So it's easy. But when you're doing Jum'ah, you're speaking to everybody, which doesn't exist in public speaking. 101 public speaking, there has to be a target audience. You can't be speaking to everybody. It doesn't work. You have to define who are you speaking to, or else what you're saying will not reach any ear. So that's why I think it's important that if you master giving a Jum'ah khutbah, then everything else will be much easier. A strong khatib can speak anywhere, no problem. But even if you don't end up wanting to do a khutbah Jum'ah, inshallah, you'll find within this series something beneficial. Systematically, Jum'ah is attached with leadership. You cannot disconnect them. You can't. Islamically, it's impossible. They've been trying to do it for centuries. One of the main reasons that it doesn't work anymore is because some people have been successful in sucking the leadership out of Jum'ah. Nothing is left in it. It is embedded in what it is. Jum'ah is the concept of his leadership. Let's say 3 or 4 Muslims, they gather somewhere in a part of the world that Islam never reached. Let's say somewhere in northern Alaska, a small town of 400 people. There are 2 Muslims, you're guaranteed there's going to be a musalla and a Jum'ah. That's how we define our communities. That's how we know about each other. That's how we find each other. That's how we connect. That's how we make sure that our society has some direction. We need to find a minbar and a khutbah so that we can move forward. That's how it does. That's how it works. No matter where we are in the world, go, you'll find it. And there are people who've done this. You just travel randomly to parts of the world that are far away from wherever Muslims. You'll find a masjid and you'll find a Jum'ah. And that's how we maintain and sustain our societies. The concept of leadership in it is very strong. The Prophet ﷺ is the one who gave the khutbah. And after him is the khulafa, even though some of them were not strong public speakers. Uthman radiallahu anhu, Dhun Nurayn, Mubashshir bil Jannah, wasn't a great public speaker. He knew it about himself. But he was the leader, he had to do it anyway. He still had to stand up and give the khutbah. It wasn't about who was stronger, who was a better speaker. No. It was about who was the leader. So the concept of leadership is still there. And you can't completely disconnect Jum'ah from it. And it's beyond me, to be honest, as a side rant. How we screwed this up, I don't understand. I do not understand. How is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts a system in place for you, for all of us, where here, you're going to gather every single week. Every week you will gather and your leader will tell you what's been happening, what's going to happen next. How is it that we were able to completely ruin that and end up aimless communities? I don't understand. We are professional, wallahi, in ruining it because it's impossible. This is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, he instilled into the deen. See, the third point, we're obligated to deliver. What I mean by that, when a speaker gives a khatira or gives a dars, maybe 50, 60 people show up? Maybe. But when you give Jum'ah, you're speaking to 1,000. Why? Because they like you? No. They're not here for me. They're here because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala obligated them to come here. They have no choice. See, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, I will gather them for you. You just deliver. You just make sure that you offer something worth their time. Make sure that you're understanding what they're going through, and make sure you have some answers and some solutions, and you have some plan for the future for them. I will gather them for you. Don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about that. That's why no matter how small the masjid is, no matter where it is, they have to do 2 and 3 Jum'ah around the world. Correct? You need, why? Because there's so many people. They're all going to come to Jum'ah. But our luck can run out, which is something that we don't seem to understand. Our luck can run out, meaning people can come to a point where they don't want to come to Jum'ah anymore, and they don't come anymore. And that's exactly what happened to Ahl al-Kitab before us. And we were told by him, alayhi salatu wasalam, that whatever happens to them will most likely happen to us unless we find some way to change our trajectory. And just like the churches and the synagogues are all empty, our masajid can end up the same way. Unless we deliver something worth their while. They come and they find something that will actually mean, that is meaningful to them. So it's important to kind of think about that. That we are here, when you're standing in Jum'ah, the people didn't come to listen to you. It's a humbling feeling, it's a good feeling. I like it. That's my favorite part of public speaking when I do Jum'ah. Because I know no one here is here to listen to me. They're here because it's Jum'ah, and they have to come to Jum'ah. Believe me, if there was a sheikh who had some credibility who told them they didn't have to come to Jum'ah, they wouldn't show up for Jum'ah. I get asked a question every single week. I get a message from anonymous people on my phone, like just drops me a voice message asking whether they have to. Of course you have to go to Jum'ah. But I don't understand the language and I'm living in, it doesn't matter. If they're speaking in Chinese and you sit for Jum'ah, it's just a part of the deen. It's one of the obligations. It's the most important prayer, salah, that exists in the week. Qiyam al-layl is nice, sunnah is nice, and then fard is important, and then Jumu'ah tops them all. Nothing is similar. We have to come. That's why the khutbah, what is the khutbah actually? Isn't it just a substitution of 2 rak'ah? It's like it's prayer itself. It's not it's beyond public speaking. It's something much more precious and much more valuable. All right. So we'll talk about 2 things right now. What the audience wants and what we want. You're a public speaker, you want something, the people who are listening want something. Right now that dynamic exists as well. This may be a bit different because it's a course, so it's not the same. But in general, when you're doing public speaking, people want 4 things. They want to relate to the content. They want to connect with the speaker. They want answers to their questions, and they want solutions to their problems. These are 4 things that every person who's coming to any public speaking venue, any Jummah, khutbah, anything at all, they're looking for all 4 or at least one of the 4. If they walk out with none of the 4, that is to them defining as a waste of their time and a failure of a khutbah. They're looking to relate to the content. When you talk about something, you have to make sure that your audience understands the references. It makes sense to them. These are things that they're going through. which is, of course, we'll go into more detail, inshallah, in that. But that's a problem today, when the imams or the khutaba aren't a part of society. They don't live in the community. They live in between the walls of the masjid that they exist in, and they've been in there for 10 years. They have no idea what's happening outside. It's impossible for them. It's not their fault even. It's impossible for them to be able to say something relevant. It's impossible. Because you're not living. If you don't live life, how do you stand in front of people who are living life and share their pain and talk about their problems and give them? You can't. So in order to be relevant, you have to be outside. You have to be working on the outside with people from different backgrounds and different situations. It has to be relevant. You can't give examples that are outdated. The moment you start giving, yourself. I used to have certain routines and things I would say. And I used to have examples that I gave, and then maybe 5 or 6 years, when I came to Canada, I had to literally shovel out like hundreds of my examples completely because they would not work at all, because no one understands what I'm talking about, because they're very specific to the place I was living in and the people that I was talking to. Then I came and I had to give seerah, and seerah is all story, so there's all these parallels I used to draw. I used to draw like 100 parallels, and then here none of those parallels worked, none of them. I remember the first time I tried one, that I was used to getting a good response from the audience I spoke to. And it was completely quiet. You could hear the owl in the background because it didn't mean anything to them. So you have to make sure that what you're saying is relevant. You have to connect. Connecting is a different thing. Connecting to the actual person. Connecting is different. It's not about the relevance of the content. It's being able to connect to people as a person. And we'll talk a lot about that. How it depends on how you deliver as well. That's why delivery is extremely important. Or else you can't connect. If you stand there and within a couple of minutes you still haven't connected to a good amount of people. SubhanAllah, connection is a very interesting phenomenon. It really is, because you don't have to connect to everybody. You just have to connect to enough people. Because those who don't connect to you will feel the others who did. And that will mean something to them, and they'll be okay to continue to listen for a little bit. But someone who connected to no one will also be known. They'll know, and the people in front of them know. It's very interesting. This human connection thing is very interesting. You'll feel it. You'll say this is pseudoscience. Fine. It's pseudo. Give a khutbah and then talk to me about the pseudoscience later. It's extremely, you'll immediately identify whether you were connected or you didn't, and to how many people you did, and what did that mean to you, and how that helped you, helped them, and helped everything move forward. Connecting is important. We'll talk about how you can do that, and what will kind of make it difficult for that to happen. Answers. People have questions. You're not supposed to stand and just answer a question. It shouldn't be this is the question, this is the answer. But you're supposed to make sure that you insert answers in your talks all the time to questions that are commonly asked. You have to know what those questions are. You have to listen, you have to keep your ear to the ground and hear what people are asking, and make sure that you insert the answers in your talk. You can't just stand up and say, this is the question that I was asked, and this is the answer. That kills almost 75% of whatever impact it's going to have. People are looking for answers. You need to make sure that you deliver these answers and provide them. Solutions. This is the most difficult one of all. People have problems, real problems. In a 15, 20-minute khutbah, it's almost impossible to deliver a solution. But that has to be a part of what we're doing here. There has to be some movement, some direction, some steps taken towards offering a real solution. What do we want? We want one thing. We want to change behaviors. That's all we want. We want people's behaviors, ourselves included, to change. They want all that stuff, fine. You want answers, solutions, connecting, all right, we'll provide you with that. But really what we're trying to achieve with all that is just one thing. I like to simplify things. It makes it easier to think when you're building your talk or your speech or your khutbah. You're thinking about, how is what I'm saying going to change behavior? You ask that question. You never give a khutbah about the importance of drinking water and not Coke. You never give a khutbah. You don't talk about stuff that are trivial, that don't change people's behaviors, or that change behaviors that aren't important, that don't actually make an impact, that don't take the society forward. You think about things that are much more profound, because you're thinking about, how do I get people's behaviors to change? It's hard to change people's behaviors. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult to do. But that's the goal. That's what we're doing. That's what we're in. We're trying to get people to consider revisiting the way they go about their daily routines and their lives, and wondering, maybe that word and that thought and that activity needs to change. Why and how? All that has to be offered, but it's extremely important. If you don't change behaviors, if the goal is not changing behaviors won't change. This is one of those times where it won't happen by mistake. You won't talk for years without the goal of changing behavior being there and then behavior changing anyway. No. That has to be the goal in order for you to achieve it. It's extremely difficult. When you think about the Prophet ﷺ, is that exactly what he did? That's exactly what he did. He was able to change people's behaviors. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. All right. How do you change behaviors? Four basic things to think about. Again, this is just food for thought so that as we go through the delivery and the methodology and the content, all that, you have something to kind of build it on. You have to focus on one behavior. When you talk, you can't talk about 5 things at once. Sometimes if you're young and you want to give a khutbah and you're excited, you end up covering 6 or 7. I still do it. I'm very guilty of this. I get excited, so I go everywhere. You have to make sure it's one behavior and just focus on that one change that needs to happen. And just keep on drilling that one change until you start seeing the impact of what you're doing in the behavior of people in front of you, in their lives. Focus on one behavior. You ensure it's measurable. It has to be something that is tangible. It can't be something that there's no way to know if it actually changed or not. There has to be ways to measure whether this behavior is actually changing or not. And you have to provide people with ways to measure that in their own lives. Does that make sense? This is an important part of monitoring change and monitoring behavior. There has to be a way to measure this change, or else it's not going to do anything. And that's probably the most missed point. And we'll talk, again, I'll go into detail about these things, inshallah. But it's one of the most missed points. When we talk about change, I don't do it well either. It's hard. It's hard to give people a way to measure their change and to measure behaviors actually getting better or getting worse even. You need to paint a very vivid picture. You need to describe what the problem is and what it needs to look like. And what will happen if it doesn't change. Painting that picture is what makes a good public speaker. That's what will kind of help you do. You have to learn how to do that. How to be able to talk about something and allow the person listening to you to actually imagine everything about the topic. Imagine how bad the negative part of it is, how positive things would be if it changed, and how horrible things will be when it doesn't. And all you have to do is look at the Quran. The Quran does this all the time. The Quran is where you learn from. You learn from how the Quran describes change to people all the time, giving all the examples, painting all these pictures, you listen to these stories. That's where storytelling comes in, and that ability to do that. But you have to paint a picture. If people can't imagine it, can't see it, they won't change. They have to be able to see what's at the end of this tunnel if I keep on going, and what's the end of the other one if I change. And if you can't describe that, that's your fault. We're held to that. We're held to the lack of being able to show people how dangerous certain behaviors are and how beneficial others are. When populations don't change, when societies don't change, public speakers are talking about the importance of doing something. It's because the public speakers aren't doing it right. All societies on earth, if they are listening to their preachers or speakers or leaders, describe to them negatives and positives about any experience, they will start shifting. They will start shifting. And the last point is you have to lead by example. Which takes me to another disclaimer. Yeah. So measurable means there has to be a way for the person who is listening to this change that you're talking about regarding behavior. How do I know if I'm changing? Like if I'm talking about ikhlas, for example. Because ikhlas is a big deal in Islam, and so it's almost in everything. How do you measure ikhlas? Are there ways to measure it? How do I know if I'm having more ikhlas? There are ways, but you have to be able to explain those ways. You have to give certain ways to measure, to help them measure. It has to be proper, it has to be valid. It can't be silly stuff. It has to actually be something that's meaningful and that they can go back to and that they can build on. So whatever change you talk about, you need to have something they can measure within the talk that you're giving and something that they can go back and look at themselves later. Have I made some change here? Anyway, for example, anger. Anger management is a known thing that people change all the time. They go to these talks and to these groups and everything, and you're able to measure. How am I getting better with my anger? Am I getting less angry, more angry? How many times a week am I losing my temper? Stuff like that. Answer your question? Okay. Another disclaimer. You broke my... So lead by example, right? Now, when I said this last time, Khalid didn't like that I said it, but I'm going to say it again. It's not to scare you, but it's the reality that I have to tell you. The moment you stand here, not all public speaking, this is for Jama'ah specifically. The moment you stand and give a khutbah, you're held to a different standard. It just happens. You're held to a different standard. You're not judged like everyone else. If you don't like that, don't stand there. The moment you do, you can't walk around thinking that I'm just like, no, you're not. Because you stood there. Because that's how sacred the concept of Jumu'ah. This is, by the way, in everything. Politicians are held to different standards, and they believe in nothing. Whenever you stand and speak to people and preach, people hold to a different standard. But whenever I'm talking about Jumu'ah specifically, when you stand on the minbar of Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, you're held to his example, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. You can't complain later in life. You can't say, well, everyone else made this mistake. No. You're not like everyone else. It's a risk. It's a huge risk. I think it's worth taking, but I have to tell you. Because later on you may look back and say, I didn't know what I was getting into. Know what you're getting into. We know. We're taught from a young age. You stand in front of prayer and you start reading the Quran, well, good for you. From now on, these are your limits. You need to be very careful in the way you're going to behave from now on. What's okay and what's not okay. You can't make the mistakes that everyone else makes. You can't, no. You can't, because you decided that you're going to stand up in front. If you're not ready, stand behind, fine. And that's just something we all have to think. The stakes are high. The stakes are high. Inshallah, with the stakes being high, the ajr is also very high as well. I mean, it's not a lose-lose situation. But that's why the Prophet, even in the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ was spoken to go to Surah Al-Isra. I don't like reading some of the verses are difficult to read. Read what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him about when maybe he was affected by someone. They said something and it affected him in a negative way. Read the verses. Go look in Surah Al-Isra and find it and read it. Because alayhi salatu wasalam is held to a different standard. And if you stand in his place and give a Jum'ah, then you're held to that as well. Not to scare you off or anything, but important. So what are the goals of Salat al-Jum'ah specifically from the Quran? Where do I get this from? I get this from Surah Al-Jum'ah. Very specific, simply, you all read Surah Al-Jum'ah. What are the elements of Surah Al-Jum'ah? We'll go through them quickly. In Surah Al-Jum'ah you have هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة. 4 things right off the bat. This ayah is in the Quran 3 times. It's in Surah Al-Jum'ah for a reason. Because that's what you're doing. Number 1, you're explaining the creed. You're telling people who God is. You're telling them the signs of Allah. Yatlu alayhim ayati is not reciting the Quran. It's telling them the signs of God. Ayati as in his signs. As explaining to people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, so they understand the relationship between them and Allah and what that entails. So they understand their creed, what they believe in, and how that belief actually works. That's the number one. This is very important. Number 2, yuzakkihim, purify the hearts. Actually help people cleanse their insides. Change the way they think, and which will change the way they feel later on, which will change the way they behave. وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابِ, teach them the rulings. What's halal, what's haram, what's okay, what's not okay. وَالْحِكْمَةِ, and the wisdom of when and how to practice, because not all rulings will be practiced at the same time. Not every ruling is going to be practiced at every moment. Some rulings are practiced now, other rulings are practiced later. You need wisdom to know when to practice what. وَالْحِكْمَةِ. Now, after that in the surah, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ حُمِّلُوا التَّوْرَاةَ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَحْمِلُوهَا كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا. These verses are talking about those who learn but don't learn. They just know information. There's no awareness they're not truly educated. So the point after that is making sure that awareness is being risen. You're raising awareness. People are being educated. People are actually being enlightened. They're actually reading and understanding, and that's taking a toll on them. And it's impacting the way who they are. اليهود are told قل يا أيها الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا. Why? Because the Jews said it's just based on our background. We are the sons and daughters of Musa. We're the sons and daughters of Ishaq and Yaqub and Ibrahim. We don't need to do this. No, it's all action. You emphasize the importance of behavior. It's not about where you come from, or who your forefathers are, how much money you have, what family you belong to. None of that matters. None of that means anything. All that really is important is your action. These are all the little points of Surah Al-Jum'ah itself. And then قُلْ إِنَّ الْمَوْتَ الَّذِي تَفِرُّونَ مِنْهُ. Accountability. Reminding of accountability. These are the goals of Jum'ah in the Quran. The concept of just Jum'ah, and why am I saying this? Like, why are you saying this? Because Jum'ah has, commonly when people talk about it, it's like it's a reminder. It's a reminder. Yeah, of what? Do you think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left this open with no explanation of what He's looking for us to do and what He wants us to talk about? No. So just go to the surah that's called Jumu'ah, that has in it يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا نُودِيَ لِلصَّلَاةِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمُعَةِ فَاسْعَوْا. And you have all these elements in this surah being explained very clearly. So it's something to kind of think about. Here's the plan, inshallah, for this series. We're going to do theory, and we're going to do practice. Theory, I'm hoping 6 sessions, inshallah. I'm hoping. I haven't done this in a while. And I haven't done it for an older audience. Usually my audience are a bit younger. So I don't know how long this will take, but inshallah, hopefully 6 sessions, we'll go through the theory, and then we'll have the practice. The theory, 3 things. I'll talk about delivery, talk about the aspect of how to do this. Body language, tone, voice, articulation, like sitting, is sitting better, is on the floor better, is standing, is moving around, gestures, all that stuff. Using props, using slides, not using them. All these things are a part of delivery, how you talk about things and how things are going to be done. Meaning we're not going to look at what's being said. We're just going to about how it's being done, which is actually way more impactful, and you'll see as we go along. Content, I'll talk about content. How to put together content. What content qualifies as something that you can do in a Jum'ah specifically, and then later in other forms of public speaking, what content is relevant and what content can be talked about, and how to find the twists in everything you talk about. Today, you can't stand up and give a khutbah about sidq and say, يقول الله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول في الحديث الصحيح إن الصدق يهدي إلى البر. You already fall asleep. You've heard this before. Everyone has heard this before many, many, many times. You want to talk about sidq, you better have a twist. You don't have a twist, then find something else. Just understanding what the content needs to look like. And then Jum'ah specifics. Issues that are specific for Jum'ah. Adab al-Jum'ah, and issues that you wouldn't need. Again, that's why Jum'ah is difficult, because other forms of public speaking, you don't need their specifics, or the specifics are simple stuff, just a few things here and there that you can pick up quite quickly on your own. But when it comes to Jum'ah, there are a lot of specifics. Dress code is a Jum'ah specific thing. Dress code. You come give Jum'ah in jeans, and I won't hear the end of it. I won't hear the end of it, not you. I won't hear the end of it. The people saying, how is he giving a Jum'ah in jeans? Yes, Sheikh, he's not naked, he's just wearing jeans. But it's a part of Jum'ah. It's a part. Certain things have to be considered. If you're actually a good public speaker and your goal is to change behavior, you have to make sure that you don't leave holes in what you're doing for people to poke at. You try to close. It's impossible to close them all, but you try to do as much as you can so people will focus at what's being done. That's the theory. That'll take hopefully 6 sessions, inshallah. And then the practice. There'll be preparation. I'll ask you to prepare something and come in, and we'll divide in groups. And you'll have a topic that's prepared, and you'll go ahead and you'll give it, and we'll listen to you. Sometimes I'll have you improvise. I'll give you, here's the topic, you have 3 minutes, you have a phone, you have 3 minutes, do it. I was in a car one day with my teacher, and just when he was taking us for Azza, someone had passed away. And just before he actually parks, he's like, okay, you're going to be talking about the hadith of Imam Ahmad, of what happens. There's a long hadith of ahwal al-mu'min wal-kafir when they die. I didn't even know the hadith. Like I didn't even know, I had never memorized the hadith. I don't know, I know what it is, but I didn't memorize it. He's like, yeah, you're going to be talking about that now. But there's like, yeah, Sheikh, there's like maybe like 15 steps, it's like a minute. Yeah, that's your problem now. And I completely bombed, but that's how you learn to kind of, you have to quickly learn how to organize thoughts, have a structure, be able to be resourceful, pick things up. He used to ask me to come up with poetry on the spot. I always failed at that. I never did that right. I used to prepare things at home. I used to think of scenarios. I'm like, okay, what are the scenarios a sheikh would possibly put me in? And I would prepare my own stuff and memorize it so that and it would work most of the time, but then one day it didn't work because there's someone who died who I didn't know. So I had nothing prepared for it and I couldn't do. But actually when he put me on the spot, I was able to produce one. So you'll be surprised when you're put on the spot that you can actually do better than you think you would do. If you have the tools, if you learn the tools and you practice the tools a little bit, you can do more. Feedback, learning to take feedback. Learning feedback is important. Styles, will be asking to do different, giving public speaking different styles. I mean, it's not just all Jum'ah. There'll be different examples and scenarios, different type of scenarios where you put in to actually talk. I'll start it all out, so don't worry. I'll say something and I'll ask you to rip me to pieces, and you can go ahead and I'll be the first person to stand there and listen to people telling me how horrible and how quickly I speak and how much I stutter, which will be fine. But once you get used to the fact that there are parts of your persona and what you do that need to be bettered and worked on, and parts that are doing well, and you're okay with listening to that, you'll be on, you'll be set. I'll end with the attributes of a successful speaker, just so that until I see you next week, you have something to kind of think about. Number one, knowledge. You have to know your material. You have to know stuff. You actually have to learn. You can't, I remember, Untitled Chapter has a long series on public speaking in Arabic. I listened to it when I was really young. I think it was like, 40 hours or something that he had. I think he has something summarized like 6 hours or so somewhere online. I don't know. But it's in Arabic, it's not in English. I think Stephen Covey has a lot of public speaking. So you have resources to look at. But they'll all tell you, لا تتفلسف. Don't talk about what you don't know. Don't go into something that you don't understand properly. Don't try to explain to people something you don't understand yourself. Make sure that you know what you're talking about. If you don't know material, then just leave it. Talk about what you know. And if you're asked about what you don't know, say, I don't know about this, because it's important that you have. And knowledge. Building knowledge is going to be all of our missions for the rest of our lives. We're building knowledge every day. Every day we're trying to learn something new. We're trying to strengthen our understanding of something within Islam and with anything, really. The more you know, the more you can speak about things in life in general, not specifically for Jumu'ah, really. Actually, what lacks sometimes in Jumu'ah khutbahs is not the knowledge of the Sharia, or at least for a lot of it's the knowledge of everything else that seems not to exist in talk. And then, actually, at least that's what I found back home in the Middle East. Here it was different. I found a mix of different speakers who haven't left the masjid in 50 years, and speakers who don't know really how the Quran. It's not. No, you're not ready yet. You need to build a bit more knowledge to actually go ahead and talk about Islam. Number two, preparation. Respect your audience, regardless of who they are. You don't have to prepare for hours, but you have to prepare. Even if I go do something I've been doing for years, and I know by the back of my hand, I always make sure I take 10 minutes and I just prepare it. Even if I'm talking to kids, even if I'm talking to family members who just come by for a Jum'ah at the house, I always prepare something, just out of respect for the audience that you're speaking to. And that's an important part. And we'll talk about that, inshallah, in more detail. Articulation. Language, command of the language, whether it's English or Arabic, command of language is important. You have to be able to play around with language and use it differently and talk about things from different angles. You have to have a wide vocabulary and understanding of grammar. And that's an important part of public speaking. That may take you a lot of time. If that's something you weren't, if you're lucky and at a young age you're taught that, great. If not, then that's something you have to spend time working on. Because it will affect significantly, it'll significantly impact your ability to connect with people. Language, the first thing they listen to, the first thing is the articulation. Whether your Arabic isn't good or your English isn't good or both aren't good or both are great, that's what they're going to look at and listen to. And sometimes, you could completely dismiss everything I talked about. If you're articulate in the languages that people people understand, then you'll be fine, even if you don't have all the other tools of public speaking. Focused. A successful public speaker is focused. Talks about one topic. Talks about it from different angles, very clear. In Arabic it's called istitrad. I do this all the time. Oh my God, it's horrible. It's one of the problems I have. Istitrad, meaning I'll be talking about one thing, and then I'll remember another story, and it'll take me in a completely different direction, and I'll end up talking about something that has nothing to do with the initial, and even I don't remember what brought me here. I don't remember what the initial topic was, and no one in front of me has any idea what's happening. So you need to stay focused and know what you're talking about and know your topic. Confidence, and it's a very thin line between arrogance and confidence. It's a very thin line. It's important that if you're not confident, it's better to come off as non-confident than arrogant. It's better. I mean, if you can't hit confidence, then you're better off being a bit shaky, because people will sympathize with that a little bit. But if you come off arrogant, that's it. And it's hard. Well, it's hard. It's not easy. Especially for those who are confident, who think that, feel that they have a good, they know what they're doing and they feel good about their material, and then they want to talk passionately. They can come off as arrogant, and it's hard. Just make sure that confidence. We'll talk about that, inshallah. And again, all these things we'll try to work on, most theoretically and practically. Honesty, credibility. You see, people have. I don't know how, really. I don't think there's a scientific way to describe this, but human beings to sniff out a hypocrite really quickly. Almost immediately the person actually believes and feels and practices what they're saying or not. And credibility and honesty are very, very important when you're talking. If you don't fully believe in what you're saying, if you don't feel it, if it's not a part of who you are, people can feel it. I don't know how. Don't ask me how. It's just no matter how, you have to, even, no matter how much of a psychopath someone is, people can feel something's not right there. And if you ask them, what's wrong? I don't know what it is. It's just something I don't know. Honesty, being honest, being sincere, actually being genuine in what you're doing. Relevant, making sure that you're talking to people based on what they know, what they understand, where they come from, their age groups, their backgrounds, their experiences. All that has to be information that you absorb and then you go ahead and use when you speak to people. حدث الناس على قدر عقولهم, as we know. Speak to people based on their I've said this story. I told this story before, but I've never done it on camera. I'll tell you this story. Our imam, one of my teachers, his name is Sheikh Marwan Zuhuri, Abu Qasim. He came to our village, I think 2001 or something. Young guy. He was in his late 30s. I was pretty young. I was 21 or 20, something like that. And he came to the village and he started. I was less than that. 21. What was I? 20? I don't know. I was less than that. I was less than that. Not that old. So he came and mashallah alayh, he was very passionate and he was really smart and he was extremely well educated and I learned a lot from him. But he would get on that minbar and for the first few months nothing worked for him. Like he couldn't get to people. He was extremely emotional guy. Very, very soft-spoken, very soft-hearted. He would stand and talk about love and the love of the Prophet and love of Allah and he would always, but people from my village are mountain people. They work in the fields all day. I mean, there are holes and there are cracks in their hands. You can put your keys in them. These guys they have very little. None of them have ever expressed emotions in their lives ever. Not to their children, not to their wives, not to anyone. They sit there and they stare at you with a dead look in their eyes. There's nothing. So this imam is on the minbar. He's talking about the love, and nothing is happening. Wallahi, nothing. And he's almost considering. Hafidhahullah, he's still leaving. He was going to leave the village. I'm like, no, you can't leave. We need you here. Can I give you advice? And I was ashamed to give it. He's like, yeah, يا شيخ, these are my people. نحن جماعة جبال حجار ما حجر تقول لنا حب وما حب ما يمشي بدك تطلع المنبر تقول يا جماعة اللي بيصليش بده يدخل جهنم يقع فيها 70 سنة هيك بتقولوا. You have to tell them that you will fall for 70 years in Jahannam if you don't do this right, if you don't give your daughter her inheritance. And he's like, I don't speak like that. I know you don't, but if you want to stay here, you have to try that. So he's like, all right, I'll do it once, but if it doesn't work, it's beyond you. So he did it. 6 lines in Fajr the next morning. 6 lines in Fajr. He couldn't believe it. He looked at me, he's like, what is it? I'm like, that's what you do. Do this next week and see. And he was with us for 10 years. And he stayed for he changed. He literally is someone who was able to change that. Not because of what I did, but he's actually someone who's very genuine and actually made a difference. But sometimes you have to know what who you're speaking to and what they're like and their nature and kind of what moves them, what doesn't. Observant. See, this is hard. This is hard today. What do you mean by observant? You have to read your audience. When you're speaking, you are constantly, every single moment, reading every single person. That's why with masks, this is so hard now. Wallahi, it's so hard. Because now I have to learn to read eyes. Like I have to understand with that squint, is it a smile or is it a frown? Or is he even yawning behind all that? I don't know. It's very difficult. Because when people are with their facial expressions, see if that's what you're seeing, then you're not going to be a good public speaker. If it's just a mush, you can't see anything. Which will be like that at the beginning. You'll be very tense, so you won't see facial expression. But after a while, you have to start reading your audience. If they're bored and they're tired, you have to see that. If they've had enough of this topic, you have to move on. If this is something that they didn't understand, they're looking at you, then you need to clarify. And that's important. If you don't read, if you're not observant, you won't be a good public speaker. You have to be taking feedback as you go, every single second. And you have to be, as I said, pious. It comes with you have to lead by example. You have to be truthful about what you're talking about. You have to practice what you preach. What you're saying to people needs to be exactly what you think needs to be done, and you're going to take the lead on it. يا الذين آمنوا لم تقولون ما لا تفعلون كبر مقتا عند الله أن تقولوا ما لا تفعلون أتأمرون الناس بالبر وتنسون أنفسكم وأنتم تتلون الكتاب أفلا تعقلون. It's a big deal. You have to be pious. You have to learn. You have to work on yourself. Doesn't mean that you can't speak unless you are perfect. That doesn't exist. But you have to be working towards. Don't tell people to do something you're not doing. That's all I can tell you. Don't tell someone to do something that you're not doing yourself. Leave it. Say, I need someone to tell me and you to do this, but I can tell you about this maybe. I can give you example. I give you advice about this. Piety. People look at your example and how you move forward with it. It's a big deal. And I can't emphasize that point enough because it's just very crucial. So that's my spiel for today. I hope I didn't take too much time. The plan, inshallah, next week is that we start with delivery. I'll start talking about the methods of delivery, aspects of delivery. Again, I'm just giving you tools. I won't try not to take too long with these, a couple of weeks. And then after that, we'll move into the practice is fun and it's enjoyable. And it's maybe some people feel a bit not too sure about it, but inshallah, once you kind of you just break the ice and you try something and it doesn't work and you get ripped, and that's fine. And then you'll be fine after that, and you'll be able to build on yourself and actually move forward and feel better about how things go. But the theory is important because I can't really expect anyone to do things properly if we don't talk about what needs to be done in the first place and where the kind of the downfalls are and what we need to focus on doing in order to be successful. So that's the plan, inshallah, for next week. Again, I'll be doing this similar talk on Thursday for kind of the younger age groups if we have one. I don't know, do we have one? Or if we have one, I'll be doing it for them, inshallah, as well. So if you have someone young in the family who wants to learn something like this, I'll be talking to them. I'll be giving something similar on Thursday after Isha. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Inshallah, in the future, because today we took a long time, I'll open the floor for questions at the end. So if you have any questions, we can discuss any topics that weren't clear or anything that you want to talk about. But I think for today we'll end. Yes, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, you can do what you want with them, inshallah. They're not, share them with anyone.
You didn't fill one of these T-shirts, so you can get the...
إن شاء الله جزاكم الله خير بارك الله فيكم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله